All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maxwell Bendis. I'm a pesticide safety educator with the Department of Agriculture and Biosecurity. I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues here.
I'm Kari. I'm also a pesticide safety educator.
My name is Mark Dragic. I'm extension agent at UH. I'm the state's PSEP coordinator. So I work very closely with the Department of Ag Pesticides branch on education for pesticides, especially for certification and recertification, which is, kind of the purpose of what we're doing here today.
Great. Yeah. Hopefully the microphone picked all of that.
Yeah, we got close enough to you.
Yeah, right. Cool. But let's go ahead and get into it. So you guys are all here today to learn about agricultural pest control. Whether you are here to earn credits towards recertification, or you are trying to pass your commercial 1A exam or your private 1 exam, or you're just a farmer and you're trying to learn how to manage your crops and your insect and disease problems a little bit better, this workshop is for you. So, quick overview of some of the content that we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about insect ecology and also weed ecology and the life cycles of those organisms. We're going to talk about plant diseases and the disease triangle and things that we can do to combat those diseases. We're then going to talk about soil and water and how the cycle of those things related to pesticides impacts our choices when we use them and also impacts the environment when we do decide to use pesticides. We're then going to bring it all together and talk about integrated pest management, looking at pest management as an ecosystem-wide thing and not just as an individual plant and an individual pest. And then we're going to get into some WPS compliance. So this is a requirement for all farms in the US to follow, unless your employees are all immediate family members or you don't have any employees. But whether you know it or not, you're required to follow the work protection standard. So we're going to talk about some basic compliance for that. We're also going to talk about some basics for calibrating your equipment. If your equipment is not calibrated, then you cannot spray the correct amount. And if you're not spraying the correct amount, then that is potentially a label violation, which can lead to fines and penalties. So having your equipment calibrated is a really important step in applying a pesticide correctly. As part of that, there is some math involved. So we're going to review some basic pesticide math. And then at the end, we have an interactive little thing where we're basically going to read through a label together. We're going to find all the hidden information in the label, all the different restrictions that we have to follow. We're going to figure out what we're actually going to do to apply a pesticide to our crop to mitigate the impact from a pest. So without further ado, let's get into it with insect ecology and life cycles. If you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Go ahead and just raise your hand. Feel free to interrupt me or either of us as we're talking. I will also break, we will also break in between sections for you all to ask questions. So, insect ecology. Let's start. There are two main ways that we differentiate insects. And I'm not an entomologist, so if any of you are entomologists, you might be cringing when I say two, but from the perspective of a pest controller, these are the main things that we look for and the main things that we think about. The first one being the metamorphosis of that insect. How does that insect grow? And you might be thinking, why does it matter how that insect grows? Well, different life stages of an insect might have different ecology. So they have different food sources, they have different habitat, they have different behavior. So understanding what life cycle of an insect you're dealing with is really critical for determining what your pest control steps are going to be. So there are two different main forms of metamorphosis. Technically, there are three, but we're not going to get into that right now. The first one being complete metamorphosis. So I think this is something that we're all familiar with because as kids, we all learn about caterpillars and we all learn about butterflies. There are four distinct stages for complete metamorphosis. You have the egg, you have the larva, you have the pupa, and you have the adult. Each one of these life stages has a different behavior, a different habitat, and a different food source. Especially the pupa, there's no food source, there's no behavior. They just kind of exist or they live. So if our pest undergoes this complete metamorphosis, we need to consider its life cycle and where it's at in that stage to determine what our best case scenario is going to be moving forward. Alternatively to that, we have what is called incomplete metamorphosis. So This type of metamorphosis does not have the distinct stages that you do in complete metamorphosis. You have different stages of nymphs, otherwise called an N star, and they slowly and slowly and slowly get larger and larger and larger until eventually they become adults and develop the secondary adult characteristics, which are typically flight, not always, but typically flight, and then the ability to reproduce. That is essentially the only thing that separates adults of these species from the juveniles. They can fly and they can make more. So if we are controlling a pest that undergoes incomplete metamorphosis, then we don't need to consider the life stage as much, because throughout its entire life cycle, it has the same habitat, it has the same behavior, it has the same food source. So that makes our job as pest controllers either a lot easier or a lot more difficult. It depends on the context, it depends on the pest. The other way that we differentiate insects from a pest controller's perspective is based on the shape of its mouth parts. So the mouth parts of an insect are what determine the type of damage that it does to a plant. Within agriculture, there are certain mouth parts that are more relevant than others. Those being piercing and sucking, biting and chewing, and then rasping and sucking, which is a little bit different than chewing. It's kind of like scraping across the tongue. There are, of course, other mouth shapes that insects can have, things like boring mouth shapes, but for agriculture, those are not always as relevant. There are a few pests like hoppy berry borer, which is super relevant for that case, but for the most part, common agricultural pests that you'll encounter in Hawaii are going to fall into one of these three categories: piercing, sucking, biting, chewing, or rasping and sucking. So let's take a closer look at some of these damage, what some of the damage looks like, because we're not always going to have the benefit of seeing the pest itself. Sometimes we need to identify it based only on the damage that is present. So for biting and chewing insects like beetles, caterpillars, and grasshoppers, typically we see pieces of the leaf missing. For caterpillars, they love to chew from the margins and the edges of the leaf in. For beetles, typically they'll stand on top of the leaf and then chew from the middle out. This type of skeletonization is really, really common for beetle feeding. You will, if you look for this around the state, you'll find it pretty much everywhere. We have a lot of oriental flower beetles here in Hawaii, and this is their typical feeding pattern. We also have a bunch of caterpillars here in Hawaii. Some of them are, not necessarily beneficial, but they're for native butterflies and moths, and so beneficial in the sense of pollinators. Others are for, pests. So specifically, this image, this was bitten by the Florida fern caterpillar, which of course is a pest of ferns. So if you guys are growing any ferns for whatever reason, maybe you're farming uluhe to sell fiddlehead for salads, this might be a relevant pest for you. Some tips for control, and when we're talking about control tips here, I'm talking about like non-conventional pesticide control, because there are conventional pesticides which will kill all of these pests. You just spray it according to the label, simple as. But there are some other things that you can do. So specifically for caterpillars, there are strains of a biopesticide called Bacillus thuringiensis. It's bacteria. It is specific to caterpillars, and it is very effective. One warning, if you're using any bacterial products, they do require a respirator. And if you're doing that at work, that also requires a medical clearance and fit test to wear a respirator. So these are very good products, but they require additional PPE. So make sure that you have that PPE, have been trained to wear it, and are medically cleared to wear it before you do so. For beetles, you can make traps for beetles. You just put a little dish of alcohol, you dig a little hole, you put it in the ground. You might even shine a light on it because they're attracted to light. They feed at night. They fall in the trap. There you go. Problem solved. Beetle's dead. No pesticide needed. Rasping and sucking. So these are thrips and spider mites for the most part. They will kind of remove the very top layer of the leaf. They'll eat up all of that chlorophyll and all the sugar that is in those leaf cells, and they will leave a kind of silvery stippling on the leaf. So control tips for these, again, non-conventional pesticide control tips, to isolate infested plants if possible. So spider mites and thrips, they love to travel along plants that are like really close to each other or touching each other. They're not super mobile otherwise. And so if we can separate out the plants that are heavily infested and isolate them, that disrupts the ability for the pest to spread and makes it easier for us to control them. The other thing that we can do is just use mechanical removal or some soapy water and a hose. So if we look at this leaf over here, which has a really bad spider mite problem, what I would probably do for this, rather than spraying with pesticides, I would just take that leaf off. I would take that leaf off, and then I would look over the rest of the plant, and I would give it a really, basically a rub down with soapy water. This assumes that the plant is not like, gigantic, and that I'm only dealing with one of them. And this is where a conventional pesticide becomes a lot easier to use. If you have a lot of plants and a large area to treat, that's where a conventional pesticide kind of starts making sense. If you have a small area to treat or just an individual plant that's having an infestation like this, consider just using some soapy water and cleaning it up rather than using a conventional pesticide. Biting and or piercing and sucking, I should say. So piercing and sucking is probably the most common for a lot of insect pests around here. There are things like aphids, there are things like mealybugs, there are things like scale, there are things like whitefly. Anything that has a little piercer, kind of like a mosquito, and it sticks it into the plant and then sucks out the juices, that is a piercing and sucking pest. You can see the damage for these. It's more of a crinkling of the leaf or a deformation. Sometimes this can be confused for a nutrient deficiency. And so that's another reason why it's important to manage the nutrients in your soil and in your plants, so that you can rule out whether or not something is caused by nutrient deficiency or whether it's caused by an actual pest. So this type of crinkling in the leaf here, this is the common thing that I look for when I'm looking for damage from a piercing and sucking pest. These insects typically like to live on the underside of the leaf. That's where they're protected from predators, it's where they're protected from the environment. So when we are spraying a pesticide to control these types of insects, we want to make sure that we're spraying from the bottom up and the top down. That way we get good coverage on all leaf surfaces. Another thing that we can do is use systemic products. So this is easy to do if we are, farming a vegetable or a leaf. If we are farming a fruit or a flower, then using a systemic product becomes a little bit more difficult. Oftentimes systemic products are dangerous to pollinators. And sometimes those labels require that you remove fruit and flower or do not apply while the plant is blooming. And so we need to be mindful of all of those restrictions when we're making applications. And if we are farming fruit and farming flower, removing those things from our plants is kind of a non-starter. So we either need to use products that are contact and require us to actually apply them to the pest themselves, or use products that don't have those restrictions and are not as harmful to pollinators. So if you ever decide to use systemic products, I do caution you about their impacts to the environment and also label restrictions that might be relevant for the type of farming you're doing. But the other thing that we can do is we can rely on beneficial insect predators. So if we are using a systemic product and we're not just throwing a bunch of pesticide all over everything, then chances are very good that we have beneficial insects in our system already. Things like predatory mites, things like predatory beetles, like ladybugs, that kind of thing. They are very, very effective at killing, eating, and mitigating populations of these types of pests. So utilizing beneficial insects while available. Here in Hawaii, you cannot just buy ladybugs and have them shipped to you. We don't allow the shipping of live insects into the state. But there are ladybugs and other types of predatory insects that currently live in Hawaii. And there's nothing stopping you from going out and collecting some of those yourselves and bringing them back to your property to have your own little population of beneficial insects. Again, I caution you about using broad spectrum pesticides if you're trying to promote these beneficial insects, because those broad spectrum pesticides are going to kill everything. So try to select pesticides that are as specific to your pest as possible to make sure that you are only impacting the pest population and not the population of other insects that might be utilizing your field. Black sooty mold. So why am I talking about black sooty mold after talking about piercing and sucking insects? It's because they are directly related to each other. So piercing and sucking insects, they are eating the sugar that is inside the plant. After they are done processing that, they poop out the excess, which is still a bunch of sugary water. That effluence, which is a fancy word for poop, is called honeydew. and that collects on the top of the leaf. And then the black sooty mold, which is a fungus, finds that honeydew, sees that it's a food source, and decides this is where I'm going to live. This is the best possible place for me. I'm going to start spreading out my hyphae and developing, my colony. And so you get this black sooty mold, which forms on top of the leaf, and this inhibits photosynthesis for the plant. This is not actually a fungal pathogen. It is thought of as a fungal pathogen. It's sometimes managed as a fungal pathogen, but the reality is that it doesn't actually attach to the plant itself. It only grows on the surface. So you do not need to use a fungicide to treat this. In fact, I do not recommend using a fungicide to treat black sooty mold. You will have much better results if you use warm soapy water, put a glove on, and then rub the leaf while spraying with soapy water. The black sooty mold, it comes right off. It just sloughs right off just like that. Clean up your plant, make it look a lot nicer. Yeah, it takes a little bit of effort, but a fungicide is not actually going to clean the plant. Cleaning the plant is going to clean the plant in this case. Yeah, no fungicide needed, wash it away. Ants. Why am I talking about ants after having talked about piercing and sucking insects and then black sooty mold? Well, ants are very smart. Ants are social insects, and they do things that normally we don't think insects are capable of doing. One of those things being farming. So ants farm insects. Some ants farm mushrooms. We're not talking about those ants right now. The ants that farm insects don't actually eat the insects themselves. They eat the honeydew. They eat the honeydew that's coming out of the insect's butts. And so what they'll do is they'll protect the insects from predators like other insects and birds. And they will also move the insects around to other plants that have not been infested yet. So if you are a farmer and you see in your system, you have piercing and sucking pests, you have black sooty mold, and you have ants, you have to manage all three of those problems because they are interacting with each other and they are feeding into each other. So utilize, if you choose to, some type of chemical control for the piercing and sucking insects. Set out some type of ant baits or do some other form of ant control for your ants, and then clean up your black sooty mold. And if you manage all three of these pieces of this system, you will see this completely fall apart. And you will have a system that is free of black sooty mold, has fewer ants, and also has fewer piercing and sucking pests in it. And that'll be a much easier job for you all. You'll have healthier plants, you'll have better fruit, you'll have higher quality product to bring to market. Nematodes. So this is another case where the damage is what we're going to be looking at, not necessarily the pest itself. So nematodes are roundworms. Do not get that question wrong on the exam. Nematodes are roundworms. The ones that we're talking about here that are plant pathogenic, these are microscopic. They live in the soil. You're not just going to be able to see them when you do your regular monitoring. You need to look for these signs of damage. So below ground, the signs of damage are very obvious. This is root knot nematode. This is what causes this problem. The root system becomes super defunct and deformed, and it can no longer properly function. But we're not just going to be pulling plants out of the ground to check their roots all the time, are we? No, of course not. So we're going to need to look at the above ground portion. So when your roots are damaged, you cannot uptake water and you cannot uptake nutrients. So oftentimes when you are seeing this type of drooping and crinkling of the leaves, even though you know there's plenty of water in your system because your irrigation is running, it's on a schedule, it's not broken, you check your soil, it's moist, but your plants are still drooping as if they had not been watered, you might have a nematode problem. Nematodes are not easy to manage when they are in your system. Typically for soil-borne nematodes like these, you need to fumigate your soil, and that is a difficult, expensive, and dangerous process. So things that you can do to stop nematodes from getting into your system in the first place, or to help manage nematodes that are in your system, is to first promote a healthy soil ecosystem. So within a healthy soil system, there are nematodes that are not plant pathogenic. Rather, they eat other nematodes. So you have a diverse, healthy soil system. chances are that you already have those beneficial nematodes in your soil, and they will help to buffer your soil from these plant pathogenic nematodes. Other things we can do is just ensure that our water and nutrient levels are good for our plants. And so if we know that our nutrients are good and we know that our water is good, then it's going to make signs and symptoms like these that much more noticeable. And we can more quickly react and know, oh, hey, this is nematode problem. I have to move on this pretty much immediately. Okay. Any questions about insect ecology and life cycles before we get into weeds? This is just a brief overview. Obviously, we don't have time to go through every single insect pest that you might interact with. The idea is more so to just introduce you to these concepts of looking at the life stage, looking at the mouth parts, considering insects as a system and as a population, and not just as an individual problem on an individual plant. So any questions about insects before we move on? All right, fantastic. Either did a great job or a terrible job. So I'm going to hand things over to my co-presenter, Kari, and she is going to talk to everybody about weed ecology and their life cycles. Thank you very much, Kari. You can also just fold it.
Okay. Okay. So bottom.
Yeah, bottom.
Okay. So I'll be discussing weed ecology and their life cycles. When it comes to weeds, we break them down between two categories, monocots and dicots. So the difference between these two can come from how they look and how they grow or regrow. We can start off first by their names. Their names are derived from the fact on how many seed leaves they have. So for monocots, that would be a singular seed leaf. And then for dicots, it would be two. Monocots are also like what we commonly see as the grassy weeds. And dicots are what we refer to are like the broadleaf weeds. When you take a closer look at the leaves of these weeds, monocots typically have parallel veins, straight lines coming from the stem, while dicots would have a more netted or branching-like pattern. They also differ in how they grow. So for monocots, they have adventitious root structures like stolons and rhizomes to expand their growth, while dicots would commonly grow from lateral buds located along their stem and at the juncture of their leaves. So this is a comparison image between a monocot leaf and a dicot leaf. The left is the monocot with the straight parallel lines, and the right is the dicot leaf with their netted veins. So we can also differentiate them with their regrowth structures. So this is a monocot with its adventitious roots. They both emerge from the base of the plant and extend horizontally outwards. The difference between a rhizome and a stolon is where it's located. Rhizomes are typically located just below the surface, while stolons are just slightly above the surface. And at the ends of these stems or roots is the growth point for the monocot. And from those growth points, they can also continue extending outwards. So here's a comparison between the growth points of grasses and broadleaf weeds. Grasses only have like underground regrowth structures, while broadleaves have both. They have their above ground structures, which are the lateral buds and the growth tipping point. So that's at the top of the plant. But they also have underground structures like rhizomes that make it difficult to control. So knowing what type of plant and their regrowth structures are is important for you to know, because this also helps you develop a more solid strategy plan. So we're going to start talking about the meristems.
Yeah.
Okay. So grass meristems are located at the base. That's like the grow areas. So for grasses, they do extend outward from the base, horizontally. And then for the meristems in broadleaves, it's at their lateral buds, which are located at the junctions between each leaf and at the top of the stem. All right. You want to step in if I?
Oh, no.
Okay. Okay. And then this one might be you a little bit more. Okay.
No, I'm happy to step in here. So For those of you who are not familiar, I have a background in plant physiology and soil chemistry. We are going to get a little bit more technical and a little bit more in-depth today than we normally would with our base level workshops. So on our left here, we have a cellular, not a diagram, it's an actual picture of the apical meristem of a plant. This could be, no, we see here the apical meristem and two lateral meristems. Yes, thank you very much. So here, where the stain has made red, these are the actual meristematic cells. So when we talk about a meristem, we're talking about the stem cells of a plant. This is where they grow from and where they differentiate from. Plants do not grow from the back out, at least so for dicots like these. They grow from the tip, and they're continually packing cells onto their tips. The growing tip of the plant, that's where all the actions happen. So we can see the meristem here, and then these are actually the leaves that are beginning to form from the meristem. Here at the bottom here, these are the lateral meristems. So if I were to take my clippers and remove this top part of the meristem here, I would be left with just these lateral meristems, and these would then activate and become the new primary meristems for that stem. And so you will still get growth outwards from here. So from a pest control perspective, if I have a shrub and I take a herbicide and I spray it over the top of that shrub, I might think, cool, problem solved, I'm done. Actually, no, all I did was kill a bunch of leaves on the top of the plant. The lateral meristems are going to activate and the plant is going to regrow. So I have not actually solved my problem. Problem still exists. Plants also have meristems in their roots. So monocots, dicots, they all have this same type of meristematic structure for the most part. Here in the root on the right, we can see that the meristematic tissue is actually more in towards, not the center, but it's not exactly at the tip. The tip, the root cap, this is a protective layer of cells, which allows the root to expand through the soil without damaging the meristem itself. No root cap needed here or meristem cap needed here on the left because it's in the air. There's no resistance. But down here in the soil, it needs the root cap to protect it. So these tips of the root structure, if you pull out your roots and you see like the very ends that are like white, if you have a really healthy root system, you might even see the little root hairs that are coming off of those end tips. That's where water transfer and nutrient uptake actually happens for a plant. The larger roots closer towards the base, those are primarily structural. They do carry water and nutrients through them, but more as a conduit. Whereas the actual uptake of nutrients and water happens at the tips of the root system. So when we are considering, our plants as a system, and we're, trying to manage a weed in this case, we not only need to consider the plant itself, but also where is its root system. So we might want to use a translocatable herbicide, meaning we spray it on the base of the plant sucks it up, and then it spreads throughout the entire plant system, killing the roots and killing everything above ground. Or if we don't have a very well-developed root system, maybe we can get away with a contact herbicide that's only going to kill what it touches. So understanding.
Is translocated herbicide the same as systemic? Or
So-
is it different?
The question was, is a translocated herbicide the same as systemic? Functionally, yes. Translocatable is kind of just a fancy word. Well, they're both fancy words that mean the same thing. But yeah, exactly. So don't consider just the plant itself. Consider what might be happening underground, and also understand that plants are very capable at regrowing from damage. Stumps of trees can grow back into full-on trees again. You really need to make sure that you are not just killing what's above ground, but also killing what's below ground when you're managing plants. Very good. And in fact,
Now we're going to talk about the life cycles with plants. So there's three main ones. Annuals, which means that the plant completes its life cycle from seed to maturity and expiration within 1 year or less. Biennials, that is in 2 years, and perennials, that is in 4 years or more. So the image you see are these two plants from the same family, Applicators, I think. And so on the right, it's the annuals plant the sensitive plant, and on the right, sorry, left is the annual plant. On the right is the perennial halicoa. So halicoa is a tree, so it's obviously going to be, its growth is a bit longer, while the sensitive plant is a bit more less because it is like a herb. So knowing the difference between, or knowing what life cycle a plant has is important for you to know, because it also helps you determine how effective your herbicide application will be. So this is a little graphic showing you when is the best time to apply a herbicide. So the best time really is during its seedling stages, because that's when it hasn't developed any protective or regrowth structures that allows it to continue growing. And as it matures or gets older, those structures develop and it makes it a bit more challenging to control. Yeah, okay. And some other challenges that make herbicide applications difficult is also some leaf characteristics. So the easiest applications would be for those plants that have thinner leaves, because there isn't a lot of barrier to how the herbicide will be absorbed from the plant. But if you have a leaf that is a bit more thick with a waxy leaf surface, the chemicals from the herbicide will have a more difficult time penetrating through. Same for those plants that have leaf hairs. The molecules won't be able to get absorbed through the plant that way. And that also leads to stomatas, which I'll pass on again to Max.
Great, thank you very much, Kari. Yeah, more cellular stuff, so hey, I'm back, surprise. Stomata, what are stomata? Stomata are basically little holes on the bottoms of leaves that allow for gas transfer in and out of the plant. Plants open their stomata not just to suck in CO2 that they turn into sugar, they also open their stomata to evapotranspirate. So that is how they move water from their roots up into the rest of the plant. They literally open a little hole in the top, and then because water is a polar molecule and does all the crazy stuff that water does, as the water kind of transpires, evaporates out of the top of the plant, the hole in the plant, that draws the water up the stem and back up into the plant. So why does this matter for us as pest controllers? When stomata are open, plants are more susceptible to herbicides. Literally because it's easier for the herbicide to get into the plant cell. There's literally a hole that allows it to enter. So we want to avoid times and environmental conditions that prompt plants to close their stomata. So when do plants close their stomata? When it is very, very hot out, they will close their stomata. So like right in the middle of the day, typically plants are not transpiring. They shut their system down and they're just kind of vibing, waiting for things to cool off a little bit, just like me. They are typically most active with their transpiration in the earlier morning and then again in the evening. This is not true for all plants, but this is a very common cycle for a lot of agricultural products here in Hawaii, where they are active in the morning, they shut down in the middle of the day, and they're active again later on. Plants also typically close their stomata at night. They are not photosynthesizing. They do not need to be open. So they are going to close their stomata so they can maintain the water that's in their system. So applying herbicides at night is going to be less effective than applying them in the morning or in the afternoon when stomata are open. So temperature is one thing. Humidity is the other thing. When humidity is high, stomata can be open. Whereas when humidity is low, plants tend to close their stomata or keep fewer of them open because low humidity increases the rates of evapotranspiration. So a plant is going to not have all of its stomata open when humidity is very low because it's going to be rapidly losing water through evapotranspiration when it doesn't want to lose water faster than it can take it back up. So be mindful of stomata. You can see here's a really nice close-up of them. Again, these are cellular pictures. They are not diagrams. Basically, these guard cells on the edges here, they engorge with water, and that's how they close. And then the plant will direct water out of that cells, and that's how they open. They use potassium. It's very cool. We don't have time to get into that today. I'm gonna hand it back over. Oh, actually, no, that's the end of this section. Any questions for Kari or I about weed ecology before we move on to plant disease? Okay, great. Good job, Kari. All right, plant diseases. Hey, quick question for the group. Who knows what this is? Not you, Mark. Yeah, I heard some rumbles. This is rust. This is rust. Whenever you see this type of orange junk, I typically assume rust. It's usually a good assumption. Okay, so plant diseases. There are different types of diseases that can impact plants. The main ones being viral pathogens and fungal pathogens. There are also bacterial pathogens. They're not as common, but they do exist. Viral infections, there are no antiviral pesticides. So we cannot rely on chemical control when we are talking about viral pathogens. We have to rely on pruning to remove the infected portion and sanitizing. So keep your tools clean in between cuts. Do not transfer the virus to other plants, and consider quarantining any infected plants that you do find. Fungal infections, a lot easier to deal with. We have fungicides, they're very effective. Other things we could do, similar to viral pathogens, space plants out, prune them to increase airflow, basically make an environment which is not conducive to the fungi. So if we look over here on the right side of the screen, we'll see what is called the disease triangle. You need all three of these factors for a disease to take place. That being a susceptible host, a pathogen and a vector, and then a favorable environment. If we remove any one of these three things, we do not have a disease. So from a management perspective, we need to pick which one of these we can most easily manage and focus on that. We don't need to do all three. We just need to focus on one. So susceptible host, well, what we can do is we can find a cultivar of our plant that is resistant to that disease. There we go. Problem solved. Host is resistant. Disease not a problem. Pathogen and vector. Well, what is a vector for a plant virus? An insect pest, specifically piercing and sucking pests. They are very good at vectoring viral diseases. So if we manage our piercing and sucking pests in our environment, we decrease the likelihood of a vector being able to infect our plants. A favorable environment. This is something that we could do to manage fungi much easier than we can for bacteria or for viruses. Fungi love dark, humid, wet environments. So we want more light, which is typically a good thing for most of our plants. More light means more photosynthesis. We also want more airflow. So pruning, spacing to create that airflow, and then consider using less water. I have found oftentimes that we are over irrigating, not just in our fields, but also in our greenhouses. A lot of times we can get away with using a little bit less water. And if we're having fungal issues in our fields or in our greenhouses, I would consider looking at your irrigation schedule and trying to pare it down and trying to make things a little drier so that the fungus is not so happy. But let's take a look at some of the common fungal and viral pathogens that you might encounter here in Hawaii. I pulled these pictures from extension articles that are readily available online. UH Extension has done a lot of work to identify disease systems and develop management plans for each of them. I do encourage you all to go to the county extension website, look at their publications, and also reach out to your local county extension agent for questions about disease management. They can also help you with pests and other stuff. Very, very useful. There's a lot of extension publications about diseases here in Hawaii. So we already talked about rust. Let's talk about rust some more. Rust and a bunch of other pathogens here in Hawaii, they are host specific. So if you have plumeria rust, you don't need to worry about it affecting your other non-plumeria plants because it is specific to plumeria and other members of the genus and family. Meanwhile, another common type of rust we have is called myrtle rust. which commonly infects ohia. So if you are, growing ohia for the purposes of, reforestation or anything like that, and you're dealing with a lot of myrtle rust, well, you don't need to worry about it impacting your plumeria plants because they're not the same. That makes your job a little bit easier as a pest controller. But understanding what rust looks like, not just from the actual, orange, rusty colored stuff on the bottom, but also, these types of lesions that can form on the plant. And this here is a close-up of these orange spots here. Being able to identify that this is a fungal pathogen is going to help you move quickly to manage it. Because if you're just looking at the top of the leaf here, this could be leaf spot, this could be something else, you don't actually know. So, you kind of whiffle, you waffle, you do a couple things that are not effective, and your rust problem just get worse and worse over time. So properly identifying your pest is crucial towards mitigating that pest. Anthracnose. So anthracnose is another common fungal disease that we find here in Hawaii, most commonly on the fruit of avocado. You get these rounded, dark colored lesions, and this is very common in areas with really high rainfall. So if you are in a very wet area, this might be something that you need to consider managing. It mainly infests fruits. You can also find it on stems and leaves, but for the most part, this is going to be something that you see on your fruit itself. Phytophthora. Phytophthora is another fancy word. It is Greek. Phyto means plant. Phthora meaning decay or disease. So literally plant decay. It is not a fungi or a bacteria or a virus. It is an oomycete, which is another type of cellular organism that can infect your plants. The damage for these diseases can vary. You can get this type of decay here on the fruit, this type of blight. You can also see this type of melting of the stem. This type of stem melting, this is probably the most common symptom and the most kind of giveaway that, hey, this could be Phytophthora that I'm dealing with here. If you guys are, growing stuff in like small pots in your greenhouse, you might be able to pop them out of their pots and inspect their root system. If the roots are slimy or anything like that, that's another indication that you could be dealing with Phytophthora in your soil. So inspect your plants to be mindful of the damage, and the symptoms appear above ground. So as we're monitoring for pests, we also want to be monitoring for diseases. So if you see anything like this, or like this, consider that Phytophthora might be an issue for you. And there are pesticides that work against Phytophthora. They might be labeled as fungicides, even though this is not a fungus. But what's important is that when you're selecting a pesticide for Phytophthora, that you pick something that's actually labeled for Phytophthora. Quick aside, for pesticide labels, what we care about most is the site of application. The site of application in this case, I'm a tomato farmer, would be tomato. And then I want to find a pesticide that I can spray on tomato and also list Phytophthora as one of the diseases that it manages. Then I know that it's actually going to work against Phytophthora, and I'm legally allowed to apply it to tomato. Those are the two things that I need to be sure of before I apply any pesticide. That's what I'm going to check. All right, leaf spot. There are different types of leaf spot. There is a fungal variety, also called Cercospora leaf spot. This is typically what is infesting coffee plants. So coffee leaf spot, Cercospora. There's also a bacterial leaf spot and an algal leaf spot. And so our management strategies for these different types of diseases is obviously going to be different. One is caused by a virus, or I apologize. One is caused by a bacteria, one is caused by a fungus, and one is caused by an algae. And so if we use a fungicide against our algal leaf spot, it's not going to be effective. Whereas if we use, a bactericide against our Cercospora leaf spot, that's also not going to be effective. So how do we identify different types of leaf spot? We have to get samples assessed in a laboratory. I believe that there is a diagnostic service, the agricultural diagnostic service within UH Extension that can test samples of leaves for diseases. And when you're dealing with plant diseases like this, there are certain ones that are very obvious, things like rust. I can look at rust, I can know that I'm looking at rust. I don't need to go talk to a scientist and have them tell me, oh, I sequenced the genome of that, it's rust. For things like leaf spot, viral diseases, and bacterial diseases, it really is important to get that sample tested and know for sure what you're dealing with. Especially for leaf spot, because your strategy is going to be different depending on what type you have. But also, if you just don't know, if you're unsure, utilize the resources around you, the agricultural diagnostic service within UH Extension, get that thing sequenced, figure out exactly what you're dealing with so that you don't waste time and money managing a problem the wrong way. And then a common viral pathogen here, banana bunchy top virus. So this is one of the symptoms that you might see. This is a mature banana plant on the left here. And you can see these new leaves that are starting to come up. These are very stunted. They're a little bit miscolored, but mostly they're stunted and they're not growing properly. That is a common symptom of banana bunchy top virus on mature banana plants. There are other ways that you can check for the presence of this virus by looking at like the vein pattern. That gets a lot more complicated. That's not what the point of this workshop is. What I want to point out to you all is that this viral disease is vectored by the banana aphid. So this is a mature one that has developed wings, otherwise known as an alate, that can fly around and lay eggs and infest other plants. And then these are the less mature varieties that are still piercing and sucking and eating all of those good sugary juices. This is the vector for this disease. So we want to make sure that we are managing our vector so the disease does not take hold. Because once it's in the plant, for banana, it's done. It's done. It has this disease. You cannot just trim out the portion of this plant for banana. My understanding for banana bunchy top is that it infects the entire plant, not just that portion that we could then trim out, like some other viral and bacterial pathogens of plants. So manage the vector to prevent disease from happening in the first place. And then nutrient deficiency. So I mentioned this before when I was talking about nematodes, but your nutrient deficiency can present like a plant disease. So make sure that your nutrients are at the proper levels in your soil, and also know what these deficiencies look like so that you can differentiate them from a disease, which can have similar but different symptoms. Okay, before I start talking about my favorite subject, which is soil and water, any questions about plant diseases or any of the other topics that we've covered so far? Great. Like I like to say, I've either done a great job of explaining it or a terrible job. So my favorite subject, soil and water. I'm a soil scientist. This is where I feel most at home. Water is a big deal in Hawaii. We get a lot of rain on this island. And so surface water is something that we need to take into consideration whenever we are using a pesticide on our fields. Because if we are spraying a pesticide and then a big rain event comes in and we have a lot of erosion, a lot of runoff from our field, well, now that pesticide is going to wind up in streams, and eventually that pesticide is going to wind up in our ocean. So we have a map of rainfall in our state on the right here. If you're in any of these red areas, then consider putting erosion mitigation control measures into your field, or consider using pesticides that are not contaminants for water systems. Because you are farming in an area which is highly susceptible to these types of surface water issues. Aside from surface water, in Hawaii, we also have groundwater. So why do we care about groundwater in Hawaii? It's because that's where all of our drinking water comes from. We rely on this system of aquifer recharge for having clean, fresh drinking water here in Hawaii. So rainwater falls on our watersheds, it percolates down through the soil, and eventually gets into the bedrock, as you could call it here in Hawaii. That collects down in the stone here, And then, there's some transfer between the ocean and the kind, but typically what we do is we will dig large wells and we will access the groundwater that is stored within our islands. That's how we drink. This is a critical resource for Hawaii. So we have certain pesticides that are considered restricted use, as I'm sure you're mostly familiar with. In the state of Hawaii, we have specific state restricted use pesticides, which are restricted because they are groundwater contaminants. The federal restricted pesticides are restricted because they can kill people. In Hawaii, we further restrict pesticides because of their impacts to groundwater. And that's because we are so reliant on our groundwater for drinking and bathing. And just this is where we get our potable water from the ground. We don't really have another resource for this. This is what we have. So we need to be really careful when we are using pesticides. They're not getting into our water system. So how do we avoid doing that? We need to understand our soil and how water moves through that soil and how pesticides interact with soil and water. So some basic concepts about soil that we all need to keep in mind when we're thinking about these things is the texture of the soil. And when I'm talking about texture, I'm talking about sand versus silt versus clay. So a very sandy soil is going to be much more porous, where a very clay soil is going to be much less porous. So it's going to be harder for water to move through clay soil. Organic matter is also super relevant when we're talking about the texture or the characteristics of our soil. Organic matter works a lot like clay in the sense that it has a lot of binding sites, which is a good thing from our perspective as a pesticide user. It also carries a lot of nutrients with it. So having a healthy amount of organic matter in your soil is a really good way to help buffer your soil and keep a healthy soil system. All those little microorganisms and invertebrates that are living in your soil, they are relying on that organic matter and the processes of breakdown of that organic matter for their resources. So yes, organic matter. Add organic matter to your systems. Organic matter is part of healthy soil systems. And then also, if we're talking about soil characteristics, how wet is your soil? If your soil is already super wet, it's going to change the way that water moves through it compared to if your soil is super, super dry. If your soil is super, super dry, then it has more capacity to absorb water. But super dry soils can also resist water, which is a little bit counterintuitive. But if you've ever had a potted plant which is completely dried out and you've tried just dumping a bunch of water on it, you might see that water splash back out at you. The very, very dry soil can resist water. So that's relevant when we're talking about percolation down into the groundwater. And that's also relevant when we're talking about runoff moving away from the site horizontally. The other thing we need to consider are the characteristics of our pesticide. So adsorption. Adsorption is the ability for something to stick to the outside of something else. Not absorption, this is not a typo. Absorption is going inside. Adsorption is sticking to the outside. Persistence. Persistence is how long a pesticide stays a pesticide. How quickly does it break down? Does it break down into something that is no longer harmful to the environment? Or does it break down into things that are still harmful to the environment? So those things need to break down themselves too. The persistence of a pesticide matters a lot when we're considering how likely is it to harm our water systems. And then last, the solubility. So how soluble is a pesticide? How well does it mix with water? A very soluble pesticide will go everywhere that the water goes. If it's moving fast, if it's moving slow, if it's moving up, if it's moving down, a soluble pesticide will be in the water. An insoluble pesticide will fall out of solution. It will stay in the soil where you apply it. Even when the water moves, pesticide isn't going to go anywhere unless the water is moving really, really fast and has enough force to actually pick up that pesticide and carry it with it. Otherwise, it wants to fall out of solution based on gravity and get stuck on some soil particles. So high solubility, high persistence, and low adsorption. This is the worst case scenario for our pesticides here in Hawaii. This is a pesticide which will readily move wherever the water goes. it will continue to be a pesticide for a very long time, and it will not readily stick to soil. Instead, it will move everywhere the water goes. So these are things we want to avoid. How can we learn about these characteristics for our pesticide? We could look at the safety data sheet to give us some ideas about the pesticide characteristics. We can also go to resources like the National Pesticide Information Center and look at the fact sheet for our active ingredient and see how persistent, how mobile this thing is. We can also just go to Google and say, hey, I'm applying this pesticide. Is it considered to be highly soluble or highly persistent, or does it have high or low adsorption? Those are all fine questions to ask Google. You can also get an idea of the solubility of a pesticide based on its formulation. Things like wettable powders or flowables are insoluble, so they are going to have low solubility. Whereas something like a dust or a powder or a water-soluble packing, it has the word soluble right there in it. It's a reasonable assumption that you're dealing with a highly soluble pesticide. So soil characteristics and pesticide characteristics are really important when we're considering the risk to groundwater and other water systems when we are using a pesticide. So let's take a closer look at a soil profile. So soil is not a monolith. As you go up and down in depth, the characteristics of the soil are going to change. So on the left here, we have an actual picture of the soil profile. You can see it's much darker at the top and the color is much more red at the bottom here. This is probably a much younger soil. The younger a soil is, the less differentiated it gets, whereas the older a soil is, the more differentiated it gets. So for us as farmers, we're mostly worried about this top layer of soil. This O horizon, O standing for organic matter, and this A horizon, A just being the first letter of the alphabet. This is where our roots are growing. This is where most of our nutrients are. This is the part of the soil where most of us stop thinking afterwards, because this is where everything that's relevant happens, right? Well, no, actually, no. Down in these lower layers of soil, this is where things like nutrients and water are moving. This is where parent material is degrading into soil. So parent material, bedrock down here, the C zone, this is where this kind of transfer happens. B and E zones, this is where nutrients and water start to flow out of this upper system and start percolating down into the bedrock here. So for water to become accessible to us as groundwater to drink, it has to move through all of these soil profiles to get down into the bedrock. So we want to understand how soil is structured in our system so that we can make better choices about how we use our pesticides to manage our pest problems. So I talked about soil texture and about porosity. So I have this little diagram here that I put together. It's so professional, and it's not. I need to be better. But you know, that's something for other Macs to deal with. Clay is not porous. Clay is very resistant to leaching. Silt has a lot more gaps in it, so water can percolate down through silt much more easily. And then sand has the most pore spaces. Water moves through sand very, very easily. What is its exchange capacity here? This is basically the ability for these types of soil to bind to nutrients, pesticides, other things that happen to be in the soil. Why does clay have a higher exchange capacity than sand? It's because of the surface area for the particles. So the small clay particles, they're not these bands like this. They are little tiny dots. Those little dots, they all have a surface. And that surface can bind to pesticides or nutrients in the soil. The more surface area you have, the more binding sites you have. And that's why clay has a higher exchange capacity than sand. So when we're talking about adsorption for a pesticide, if our pesticide has low adsorptive potential, we can still have in our clay system the ability to bind that pesticide. Because we have so many binding sites and our soil has a high exchange capacity, a high ability to bind, that even though the pesticide has low adsorptive qualities, we can still bind it within our soil. Whereas if we have a much more sandy system, then we need to be much more careful about our pesticide choices, make sure that we're using something with a high adsorptive potential so that we are keeping our pesticide where we apply it in our soil system, and it's not just going wherever the water happens to go. And so we've talked about water in soil. Water behaves the way that it does all the time because water is a really special molecule. But I kind of explained briefly before, water is polar. So it kind of pulls itself along with itself. And so you have different types of water in the soil. You have what's called capillary water, which is water that is kind of suspended in the soil in these like small little gaps between the pores. And then you also have gravitational water, which is the water that falls down to the bottom because gravity pushes it down. When soils are dry, they're able to absorb more and we have less gravitational water. But when soils are very wet, that water is going to go right through and we're going to have more gravitational water. So this gravitational water, this is what carries the potential to contaminate our water sources. Because if we have a high amount of pesticides in our gravitational water, it's going to keep percolating down, keep percolating down, keep percolating down until it gets into our bedrock and incorporates itself into our water sources. So be mindful of the moisture content in your soil because that also impacts how water moves through. So this is not an easy concept to understand. Soil, water, nutrients, chemistry, but having some idea of these things and knowing that these problems can exist is the first step towards mastering those issues. And I'm available to answer questions about, soil chemistry and how water moves through it. Extension agents are also very knowledgeable about these things. So remember that you are not alone in your work. Not just your fellow employees and coworkers, also the state and UH Manoa have systems set in place to assist you. We want agriculture to happen here. We are very invested in helping you be better farmers and land users. So please reach out to us for assistance. We will help. The last concept that I want to cover with you all is the difference between leaching and runoff. So very simple. Leaching is water moving down vertically through the soil profile and getting into our groundwater, whereas runoff is water moving horizontally across the land, either eroding the soil with it or just moving across the land, and then getting into our streams and eventually moving out to the ocean. Eventually, all of these things do wind up in the ocean, even the stuff in our groundwater, but these are these two concepts here. So leaching, sandy soils are very susceptible to leaching. Clay soils are less susceptible to leaching. Words. Big arrow, more water. Small arrow, less water. Flip side, for runoff, we see the opposite is true. Sandy soils are less susceptible to runoff because the water more typically percolates down and does not collect on the surface. Whereas clay soils are more susceptible to runoff because they will resist that percolation of water and it will instead travel down slope. So if we're farming on slope, we need to be mindful of runoff, maybe install some terraces, maybe do some other things. If we are on flat ground, we don't need to worry about runoff as much. It can still happen. We would be more concerned about leaching. We should be concerned about leaching no matter where we are, but the aspect of your slope makes a big difference for whether leaching or runoff is going to be your main concern. We're talking about pesticides and water. Okay, there was a lot of science, a lot of technical concepts, a lot of information that we just threw in your faces. Any questions about that before we move on to our next section? Yeah.
So I'm sorry, so we're talking about leaching and runoff. Just a little, can you explain more like, when you're talking about pesticides, why you have one pesticide? Whereas like why avoid if you're in a leaching environment versus a runoff?
Yeah, of course. So the question was more specifically about pesticide characteristics in leaching versus runoff situations. And the answer is basically it's kind of the same. The same types of pesticides are going to be problematic in either of these situations because the problematic pesticides are the ones which move with water and stay pesticides for a long time. So I would say that in any case, we want to be avoiding pesticides that are highly soluble and highly persistent. If we are considering leaching versus runoff, both of those characteristics are problematic in this case. Typically, our best case scenario for a pesticide is going to be one which is highly adsorptive, meaning that wherever we spray it, it's going to stick to the soil. It is relatively insoluble, soluble enough for us to apply it, but not so soluble that any water movement is going to carry it with it. And then something that has a low persistence, meaning that it's not going to stay a pesticide for a really, really long time. So the answer is yes. They're functionally the same when we're thinking about the pesticide characteristics. It's just where the water goes that is different. And also what type of soil is susceptible to that. So if I'm on a slope, but I have a really sandy, really porous soil, then I can get away with a little bit more than I'd be able to if I had a really heavy clay soil. And alternatively, if I was not on a slope, if I do have a clay soil, then I don't need to be as worried about leaching as I would if I had a sandy soil. That's kind of what the point that I'm trying to get across with this slide here. Did I answer your question? Okay, fantastic. Thank you for, wow, I'm bad at words. I've been talking all day and I'm bad at words. Thank you for engaging. All right, I'm gonna now hand things over to Mark and I get to stop talking for a while. Thank goodness.
Next, can you take pictures?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, this phone's about to die. Got 20 minutes,
Okay.
20%, yeah.
It's okay.
And then it's just gonna die. We're doing a screen recording, so
Oh,
we should be okay.
Okay. Next section here, we're gonna go through IPM and do the last few sections for you, excluding the math, because Max made those slides and he confused me, so he'll get to confuse you too. Okay, so basic principles of integrated pest management. There are many tools at your disposal to manage pests, not just chemicals, not just pesticides, right? And a lot of them play into each other. They work together towards your goal of managing pests. So we have cultural management up here, things like cover crops. You know, you can do a lot of things with cover crops. You can plant legumes that fix nitrogen for you. You can plant flowering plants or flowering legumes to attract beneficial insects, like predators of your, those that parasitize your pests. You can do other cultural management techniques such as plant spacing. Mechanical management, these are things like tillage, cultivation, weeding, or like trimming trees. You know, you can get better airflow, less sucking insects that way, like white flies and mealybugs and stuff like that. And you know, these play also back into the cultural management techniques, right? Exclusion, so this is keeping pests out. So for pigs, that would be fencing, right? Keeping them physically out. Some insect pests, this would be like protected culture, you know, you have a screen house or a glass house. Quarantine, you know, this is actually the building we're standing in right now, right? Quarantine buildings, making sure that anything that's coming in here is not infested or infected with some disease before being released. Biological control. This one can be oftentimes difficult to implement on a farm or like agricultural type of situation, unless it's like a biocontrol release that the government does. They do this, right? They have the gall mites for the strawberry guava and stuff like that they have released. But not something that you as a farmer could easily do. Host resistance, that is something that you could do on a farm, so you could get resistant varieties of your crop that, for example, you have severe fungal issues, a certain fungal disease that is giving you high pressure, or a viral disease that's giving you high pressure, you can get resistant cultivars. Yeah, sanitation. This is particularly important in places that you need to keep clean, such as protected culture. You have a screen house or something like that. We typically sanitize to keep the area clean, right? Aquaculture, that's a big thing too, like after each cycle. And then finally, you have chemical control, right? So, and chemical control has several different, I guess, classifications that we can talk about here. So there's selective and non-selective. This is something like with an insecticide, this would be like a neonic or something like that, systemic, that like only the sucking insect that's sucking into the plant is getting it, not the that's getting poisoned by it, not the natural enemies that are trying to kill your pest. Or for herbicides, for example, there's broadleaf or grass selective herbicides that you can choose from. So if you're having a broadleaf crop, you can spray a selective herbicide for grasses, knock down your grass weeds. Then rotate it, back with your cultural management, right? Rotate it back to a grass crop and then use those broadleaf herbicides so your weed population gets lower over time, right? And then there's persistent, non-persistent pesticides. So it depends on your context, what you need. But there's things that will stay in the soil for a while, stay in the plant for a while. And then there's things that once you spray them, they're kind of done with what they're doing. Like oils are an example of that. Like once you spray it down, it's kind of done doing what's doing, diatomaceous earth, stuff like that. Once it's applied, it's kind of done doing what it's doing. And then there's systemic and contact insecticides. So contact, like insecticidal soaps, for example, right? Like you spray it on, it's a contact, any insect it gets on, it's gonna dry it out and kill it. Whereas a systemic, like the neonics, right? They're going into the plant and throughout the plant. So if whatever's eating the plant is getting exposed to it. The caption on the bottom, chemical control is your last resort. This is for many reasons, right? It's quite expensive to use chemicals. So if you're able to manage it with cultural techniques, host resistance, your tillage for your weeds or whatever, right? Exclusion, like keeping the disease out of there in the first place, or the pest, then you don't need chemicals, right? But oftentimes we do. We live in an environment where pests and weeds can reproduce all year long, whereas other places they have the benefit of freezing all of those things in winter and restarting in the spring. We don't have that benefit here. So you will probably need to use chemicals in some sort in your work, right? But selecting the chemicals in a way that has the least impact on those other organisms that are benefiting you, such as those like parasitoid wasps or whatever that's helping you with your insect pests. So using biorational pesticides, this would be something like the insecticidal soaps or like the BT, that takes out Lepidoptera as a bacteria, right? You're spraying on top of your crop. And then using something like Lanate as your last resort if you're going to lose your crop, lose all your money, as a conventional pesticide there on top. Okay. I feel the need, after mentioning some product names, to make the disclaimer: I'm not promoting or discouraging the use of any product. They're here for educational purposes only. Okay. Continue here. Okay. If we're going to use chemicals, which we probably will in agricultural context here, we need to practice resistance management to make sure that those rapid life cycles of pests here in our environment don't become resistant. We're not breeding resistant pests here. The importance of this can be, like, we have several examples here that are really bad. Like diamondback moth wiped out 1 or 2 modes of action within a year or 2 of its emergence here as a really bad pest. And now those are not options for management anymore, right? So the more options you lose, the less you have to work with, and then the more likely they are to become resistant in the future. The concept is over here. This is how it works. You can see the first leaf here on the top left. It has one red guy. The red guy is red bug is resistant. So you have a huge population, and there's like one insect there that has a mutation or something that it is resistant to whatever insecticide that you are applying. You kill almost all the bugs. Maybe some are hiding under the leaf. Maybe some flew in from another field after. So that red guy that was resistant is now making babies with the non-resistant ones, right? So your next generation of pests has a lot more resistant ones. Maybe half in the population are now resistant. There's still some that aren't. So you spray the same mode of action. Again, I won't say the same chemical or the same product because there are many products that have the same mode of action, even if they have a different active ingredient, right? So important concept. Okay, we spray it again. We have like okay success, and that's probably the last time it's ever going to work for you. Because after that, you're not even going to notice that you killed the one blue guy. If you rely on the same mode of action time after time, this is what happens. So the key here, what you want to do is find as many modes of action that you can rotate through that are effective for you, right? You don't want to be spending money on a product that's not going to work at all. So what you want to do is find at least 3 modes of action that you can rotate through to work down that pest population over time. If you are not clear on what modes of action of your products are, you can visit IRAC, the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee website, HRAC, I don't know how you're supposed to actually say the acronym, for weeds, and FRAC for fungicides. Oftentimes, not always, the top of the label will have a little bar on top, and it'll be like a black and white bar, and it'll say group whatever herbicide or group whatever. Yeah. So
Is it required for every label to have like so not all labels?
not
will
all
have-
labels will have it. Yeah.
It won't basically state the mode of action.
Not all labels. So sometimes you'll have to look it up on those websites.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
And
would be helpful. If it was on like right on the label, like you just look at it and you know what it is.
often they do, but not always.
Yeah, most
Yeah.
of the ones I see have.
Yeah. It's, I would say my personal opinion is it's a very useful tool.
Yeah.
Because you just look at a label, you're like, okay, I sprayed Motivac like 4A. I did my imidacloprid last time I sprayed it Meyer. I'm gonna mix it up with a, I don't know, like a insecticidal soap or something this time.
Yeah.
And, change, right? Like it's not on every label, but it is common to see those on labels. And we'll go through a label example later. I'm not sure if it has it on here.
It's
Shame on Impede. That would have been fantastic if it did have it there. We could go through an example, but anyways, it's not on that label.
So if it's not on the label, you have to go to this website and then go look for the active ingredient, and then
Yeah.
it tells you what. Oh.
But
okay.
I'll be honest with you, man. I just Google it and it pops up right away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Okay.
it's not that hard to
Just get it on.
figure it out. Yeah.
Okay.
And look at or I would say Google the active ingredients or active ingredients. You might have 2 modes of action in one product. That happens sometimes. But if you use the product name, there are like 50 different formulations of Roundup, right? And they have different modes of action. Like the one you see for homeowners nowadays in Home Depot or whatever, that's group 22, right? Like diquat in there, whereas glyphosate for farming is group 9. So like don't use product name, use active ingredient when you're searching. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, any more questions on this? I think that's a valuable discussion here. Okay, cool. I already did the Diamondback moth thing. I'm so sorry, Max. I ruined it. But this is an actual example here, maybe like 10, 12, 14, I don't know how many years ago now. This pest became a real big problem here. It still is a real big problem here. But basically everyone was using one product to manage this pest because it worked great. And within a year, that actually the manufacturer stopped making that product because there's no point anymore. This pest is now resistant. And it's, more than 10 years later, and the pest is still resistant. Population is still resistant to that mode of action. So the point here is that you rotate through at least 3 effective modes of action, if you can. There is not always options for you for your site. So your crop in the agricultural case, there are not always choices for 3 different modes of action that work, right? Yeah, so really try not to rely on just the chemical control in that case. If you only have 1 or 2 modes of action that actually work for you, make sure to lean more heavily on the other forms of control in management. So trap crops is an example of what is used for diamondback moth now. Planting a crop that those insects like, attracting them, and then terminating that crop before they can finish their life cycle. So you knock down part of the pest population. Don't forget about it after, because you're just breeding more pests, right? You have to destroy that crop before they complete 1 life cycle. Okay. That's just an example, right? You break the life cycle of the pest, you get a bunch of adults to, like lay eggs or whatever, or try to mature before they can lay eggs and knock them back. Destroy the crop or spray that trap crop, or both, right? But anyway, you try to break the life cycle so that they don't breed more, and you're actually knocking the population back. That QR code should bring you to this article. It'll explain more. The authors of this are more expert than I am, so read the article. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Okay. Done with that section. Does anyone have questions about IPM before I move to the next section? Ooh, okay. We're going to go into WPS, or Worker Protection Standard. So this is a huge law about protecting agricultural workers. So in the context today, we're in a farming context here. WPS applies. In other industries like landscaping, for the most part, structural pest control, they don't have WPS for them. So their record keeping rules, their like things like decon supplies and stuff like that, signage are different, or they don't exist. So we are talking about agriculture here. So Worker Protection Standard applies. You can see that nice, cool little sign there that has very specific specifications on size and angry guy with a hand. That is necessary at the entranceways of fields where pesticides have been applied, or you're planning to apply right then. Okay. So this is the law. 40 CFR Part 170 is a worker protection standard. If you feel like reading it, you can. It is like hundreds of pages long, really difficult to digest. So we're giving you a synopsis here. This is not the whole thing. It's a brief PowerPoint synopsis for you. Basically, this law establishes rules for protection of agricultural employees. It only applies when working with agricultural plants. So in general, an agricultural plant here is something that you're growing one place and you're going to distribute it or sell it or move it to another place. So for landscape industry, nurseries do count, right? You're moving it out for commercial purposes. Conservation work, it gets a little ambiguous because it may not necessarily be for commercial purposes if you have a nursery, but still do WPS just in case. For farms, it's very clear, right? You're growing a crop. And you're going to sell it, right? No one just has a crop just to grow it and then let it die. Okay. Only applies when a pesticide has an agricultural use requirements box. We'll see an example of this in a little bit. And only applies in crop areas. So this is kind of, it was confusing for me. So I assume it's confusing for other people too. A crop area is like your field where you're going to plant. It does not mean rights of way. It does not mean roadsides. It does not mean fence lines. So you don't need a WPS sign on a fence line if you're not growing a crop on that fence. You might be growing, I don't know, like dragon fruit on a fence. It's possible. And then in which case that, that would apply. But if you're just maintaining a roadway or a fence line or making sure there's no weeds around your porta potty or whatever, that is not a crop area. WPS does not apply in those areas. Okay. All right. Okay, WPS training, worker and handler specific training requirements. There's annual training required for all employees, whether they're workers or handlers. Worker means someone that works at an agricultural facility or site where pesticides are used. A handler is anybody that's interacting with that pesticide in any way, in terms of like handling a pesticide bottle, like holding it after the seal is broken, manufacturer seal is broken. So Max will be very specific there. Anyone that's mixing, loading, applying the pesticide, or working on the application equipment. So if you have a mechanic that's wrenching on your tractor and that tractor had been used to spray, they are a handler, okay? This can be kind of, I guess also confusing if you don't like have a mechanic that works for the company and you need to have a mechanic come in and work on your equipment. They'll have to get WPS training. Okay. There is no grace period for WPS training. So before people start working, they need the WPS training, whether it's worker or handler training. The worker and handler training can be done by anybody that has a train the trainer certification, which we do host classes, but nobody comes to them. So if you don't want to deal with the record keeping requirements of having a RUP certification, you can get the train the trainer certification and just do WPS for your agricultural facility or company or employer or whatever it is. I would do that if you don't actually need an RUP cert. If you want that, ask us and we will set up a training so you can get that certification. It is a card. It does look like the RUP certification card, but it's numbered differently. Also, anyone, I already alluded to this, but if you have a restricted use pesticide certification, you can deliver the WPS training as well. Or you are designated by a state or tribal authority, which here is Department of Ag, and Department of Ag also everyone has an RUP certification anyway, so like I guess they're double certified. I don't know, but whatever.
I technically have all three.
Yeah, I did have all three, but you let mine expire.
That's right.
And they gave me a picture of a fish.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can pass that around if you guys want to see what that looks like. It is a picture of a fish. Okay. Cool. Is there questions about WPS yet? I think there's more slides on this, but no. Okay. There is a requirement to display pesticide application information in this law. So anybody that's working on that farm, whether they be workers or handlers, they need access to the application information. Also, the employer is responsible for getting employees medical assistance in case there's a work-related pesticide emergency. So if they get exposed, it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that that happens and pay for it. Notifying by posting and or verbal notification of pesticide applications and restricted entry intervals. So this is a agricultural specific thing, restricted entry interval. Other industries don't have this. So like you may see like the people that do the parks, right? They spray an herbicide on a park, the lawn, like the grass for a soccer field. It will say in the pesticide label, you know, something to the effect of wait until the sprays have dried before letting people in. Yeah. So then there's kids playing soccer. In agriculture, because this law is structured like this, though in the agricultural use box on the label, it will tell you most times it will have hours that are restricted before people can go in unless they have early entry. But that's early entry is another thing. We'll talk about that too. But basically, no one can go inside the field. There needs to be the sign there at the entranceway saying, don't come in here. And there's been pesticides applied for 4, 12, 72 hours, whatever it says on there, unless you have T-Loan C35, and then you have to read 3 pages to understand what your REI is. Anyway, that's a thing with WPS and not a thing for not WPS. Okay. This law requires the employer to provide PPE for workers and handlers and to set up decon kits for washing. Like if someone gets exposed to pesticides, there needs to be a decon kit. I think there's a picture in a future slide of what a decon kit looks like. This QR code hopefully brings you to the law for WPS.
I think it goes to the compliance guide.
Okay, that's much more helpful. That like 2015 sheet thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful. It gives you a checklist. You just kind of like, okay, yeah, I have a decon kit. Yeah, I have a central notification area. Yeah, I have whatever. That's very helpful instead of reading 600 pages or whatever. Okay, we're good. Okay. Also, as a part of this, there's a concept of application exclusion zones or AEZs. Really confusing. This changed kind of relatively recently. My opinion is really confusing. So my personal preference is keep everything at 100 feet. That means keep people away from you, right? But you, in certain contexts, you can have smaller application exclusion zones. And an application exclusion zone, I should probably give it a better definition, is an area where whoever's applying the pesticide must keep other people out of that area. Like certain, not some radius.
Zone.
Yeah. Okay, that zone. Okay. That includes your neighbors. So if your field goes right up to the line and then there's like a house or a neighbor's field on the other side and they're working in there, you have to stop your application until they move. Or tell them to leave or ask them to leave, I should say, until you're done. That is a legal requirement. So your property boundaries don't really matter. Like you have to keep people outside of that zone. So if a plant is under 12 inches of height, you don't have an AZ or AZ is 0 feet. When a plant is greater than 12 inches height and you are on the ground doing ground application, 25 feet. When applying with small droplet size, like a mist, fine spray, AZ is 100 feet. And all aerial applications is 100 feet. So you have to keep people that far away, or you need to stop what you're doing. That's the applicator, right? That's the applicator's responsibility to monitor that. Okay, questions about AZs? Cool. Like I said, like just keep everyone 100 feet away, if at all possible. Okay. It's easier to remember. I'm not going to be doing calculations or like measuring plants when I'm out there in the field. I'm just going to keep people 100 feet away. Okay. Restricted entry intervals, I kind of talked about this, and then early entry work, which I said I would talk about later. In the agricultural use box, it will have an REI, and this starts when the spray, or sorry, not spray, when the application of the pesticide has finished. Warning signs, this warning sign in those specific specifications of size and design that are inside the WPS law, very specifically, need to be at all the entry points to that crop area. Okay, so if you have several entry points to that field, you have to put them this several times. And it's the applicator's responsibility to make sure it's out there and to take it down when the REI is over. Early entry work. This is a weird thing that refers to work that you're going to have to do before the REI is expired. So if you have a 72-hour REI and you know that you're going to have to go in there for something hard, or probably won't have harvest in there, but like irrigation, scouting, whatever you have to do in there, you're going to have to do it. You can have people go in there as early entry workers, but there are requirements, right? There's extra PPE, minimum of 4 hours after the spray. So if you have that 48-hour REI, you have to wait 4 hours first. Then give them extra PPE, which is in a separate place in the label. So make sure that you read that also and provide them with that PPE. And they need to be 18 years of age also. So someone like a high school student, 16 years old, you cannot have them do early entry work. Yeah, okay. This is like where that extra PPE requirement is. We'll practice this in a little bit. We'll look at a label. You'll all get a copy. This Max likes printing. Thank you very much. Okay. For your record keeping for the worker protection standard, it is a little bit different then the restricted use pesticide record keeping. So my suggestion to you is to use the Department of Agriculture's template that they have online for free and just fill in all the information all the time. And that way it's much simpler to do your reporting and you have everything you need for everything. Okay, that's just my suggestion though. You can do it however you want, as long as it's compliant. All right, for worker protection standard, this is different from your like P45 stuff, yeah? You must have a pesticide name, active ingredient, EPA registration number of that product, restricted entry interval, crop or site treated, and location description of treated areas. Yeah, so those things this is like a part of the template thing that the Department of Ag has is the green boxes are the WPS requirements. Yeah. Are we missing REI? Oh, no, listen. Cool. All right, questions about this, where to find it, any of that? Maybe we can put a QR code later. Like that.
Yeah, we have this on our website. You guys can also just contact us and ask for a copy.
Yeah, that works too. Cool, okay, no questions. This is what a decon kit should look like. In some cases, you'll also need eye wash. So if your pesticides that you use, if any pesticide that you use on your facility requires eye protections, you also need to have eye wash. There's extra requirements for that. So there's like portable ones in the field, and there's also requirements for one that can last 15 minutes at 6 gallons. Yeah.
Is potable water
here.
considered eye wash?
If it can deliver in the volumes that are necessary, in addition to the normal decon water. So there's specific guidelines. It says it has to last 15 minutes at like, I think it's a total of 6 gallons. I'm remembering exactly, but we can look it up. Plus the 3 gallons per handler or 1 per worker, yeah?
Oh, so it's plus then.
Yeah, it's in addition to that. So for the decon kit, each worker, so like WPS worker will need 1 gallon of water, single-use towels, soap, and change of clothes. Each handler will need the same, but 3 gallons of water. And then if those pesticides that you have require eye wash, you need to have eye wash as well. And there's in-depth requirements in the actual law that Max, you're standing up like you want to talk. So
I just wanted to get a little bit closer to the mic, yeah.
You're very close.
Yeah. So Mark is right. Having like access to a hose or something does not disqualify you from needing to have, access to water for decontamination. The main thing when we're talking about like potable water for decontamination, for hose, for like eye wash, it needs to be able to supply potable water at a steady, low volume stream for at least 15 minutes. So not like high pressure, like jet from a hose, like simple, easy, like steady flow that you can hold on your eye and wash out for 15
But
minutes.
then those small saline bottles, that wouldn't be able to handle it.
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
So these,
Go on.
I thank you, Mark, for giving me the floor.
Yeah.
So these small saline bottles, these are for emergencies.
Yeah.
So if I'm out in the field and I get a bunch of pesticides splashing in my eyes, I'm going to use this bottle to get myself to the point where I can see. And then I'm going to walk over to either the emergency eye wash station, which has the 2 little faucets that spray directly at your eyes, or a hose with potable water. And then I'm going to spend 15 minutes washing out each one of my eyes. So if I have the eye wash station, I only need to be there for 15 minutes. I can wash both my eyes at the same time. If I have a hose, I need to spend 30 minutes. First washing one eye. So never wash down into your eye. Wash one eye at a time. I turn my head to the left. I wash my left eye. I turn my head to the right. I wash my right eye. 15 minutes for each eye. So having the potable water with you for decontamination is really, really helpful to get you to that hose. There we go. Thank you.
I'll add to that. So the decon kits need to be within a 1/4 mile of where people are working. And then there's a central station that needs to be there to be able to deliver that 15 minutes of water. Yeah, so like if you have a hose at the office or something.
So what is the definition of potable water? Or is that like drinkable? So
Yeah.
not, is it zero? Oh, I think we had this conversation.
As far as I understand, potable means drinkable.
Oh,
If you have questions about whether or not your water source is potable, you need to talk to the board.
like well water, right? We have well water, so. It
Yeah, I
doesn't
think you have to
equalize.
test it, but I don't know the specifics on that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just curious. So I like to ask multiple people the same question, so I kind of get an idea.
That's
That's the same question.
It's smart, because if people give you different answers, then they're,
Like, then it becomes even more confusing. Okay,
no, I understand it, potable means drinkable.
There's also a 600-page law that you could read that. Will
well, I'd
explain
rather
that
ask you guys.
in detail.
It's gonna be down to ask the question.
Okay, any more decon kit questions? Oh, I should mention also the change of clothes should be able to fit everyone. So if Max buys extra small for him, I'm not gonna be able to fit that. So I don't want to be walking around naked on Funia Road, like, you know what I mean? Okay, so make sure that fits everybody. Okay, cool. All right, done with the WPS stuff for now. Any questions before we move on? Oh, okay. Wait, we turn this thing off by accident.
No, my light's still on, so probably still working.
Yeah. Okay, Max is gonna do math stuff because that's what he does.
We're
And,
not up to that slide yet.
oh, okay, I'll do the calibration and he'll do the math.
Yeah, that works.
All right. Cool. All right, so we can go through different equipment types kind of quickly, but just to give you the idea that your calibrations may be a little bit different for each one. There, for like dry applications, there are dusters and granular applicators. So you can have like, commonly they're also used for fertilizer, like granular fertilizer, dispersing them. So you can have like the disc ones that throw it out. There's also drills. This is for like seed crops. Shank soil injectors. Also for seed crops, you like put it on the back of your planter. And then ram air and granular things. This is less common, but uses air pressure to disperse it. Okay, gas applications. So this is fumigants, and there's two different ways that these really work. There's pressure fed, so it uses the pressure from the tank to disperse the gas, the fumigant gas. And then there's gravity, where you just turn the tank upside down and let it come out as it comes out. There are still people that use agricultural fumigants here in the state, actually quite a bit still. So that's a thing. I don't know if any of you do this, but anyways, it is a thing that happens here. Liquid applications, there are aerosols and foggers. It's mostly for like structural stuff, like you put those little bomb things in a room and run away after you already get exposed. Trigger pumps, hose end, push pull, compressed air, bucket or trombone, backpack, wheelbarrow, estate, power driven boom. Okay, like there's like everything in the world for liquid applications for spraying. And I don't think we have in here, but there's also injectors for chemigation, but that's for another category. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, boomless air blast, ultra low volume. This is like what they do for like forestry applications, and in the mainland they'll fly an airplane over and like just like very fine droplets over thousands of acres. I think they do that for mosquitoes, for certain mosquitoes that vector diseases for humans in certain places too. Controlled droplet electrostatic, that's kind of cool. It like uses electric charges so that the particles cling to things like pests. Okay. Components to application equipment. This is maybe a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about today. I'm not going to really go over it, but there's different types of pumps and they're used for different types of applications. For like liquid applications, if you have a high pressure system versus a low pressure system, you're going to need a different type of pump so it's not getting worn out, or it can actually deliver what you need depending on your situation. Agitators. So this is for non-water soluble pesticides. So if you're using a flowable or water dispersible granule something like that, powder, wettable powder, they don't actually dissolve in water. They are delivered by water, your carrier, but you need to keep mixing it so all those particles don't settle to the bottom. So you'll need like an agitator, and you can use a powered mechanical thing that's like, like a little paddle that moves around in your tank. You'll need, obviously the little engine to power that. A bypass agitator, this is really useful for low budget applications, especially where you need to manage your pressure and your boom, and you don't have like expensive gauges, or not gauges, expensive valves. You would just put a loop back from after your pump, before your boom. You have like a PVC that goes back into the tank, and you would adjust the ball valve until you get the pressure that you want. And it's just flowing back into the tank and mixing constantly as you're going, right? Hydraulic and jet action, this is a little bit more expensive, but it's the same thing. It mixes whatever's in the tank, right? Okay. Gauges and valves. Pressure gauges, obviously, let you know what your pressure is. You're gonna need different pressures for different systems to work properly. Pressure regulators, so this is like if you get too much pressure in the system, you don't want to blow out something, it'll have a relief valve. Or it will, sorry, that's another thing. Okay, it will reduce the pressure going out past a certain point for a pressure regulator. A throttling valve, kind of similar, it just like limits the amount that can go. Spring-loaded bypass valve, so this is when your pressure is enough to like break your system. You select a valve that has the spring that will open before you blow out your boom, and it'll just go back into your tank, bypass. Unloader valves, this is for after you're done spraying and there's still solution inside of your boom, and you want it to drain. So when there's no more pressure, keeping it closed, it opens and drains out. Okay, it's like the opposite of this, like a backwards bypass, spring-loaded bypass valve. Okay, filters, there's tank screens, nozzle mesh filters. They're both important for different things. Not clogging up your system, tanks. This can be really important here depending on your formulation. So I know that at least one paraquat label out there says do not use in aluminum tanks. Yeah. And then the Honcho label, for example, says don't use in galvanized steel tanks. The galvanized steel tanks, because both of them create combustible gases if they are in those materials. So be careful about what your tank is made out of and what products you're using. Plastic is usually a good option. Yeah, okay. Nozzle types, there's regular flat fans, even flat fans, kind of depends on what you're doing. Flooding, side entry, cord insert, disc core adjustable, like on a backpack sprayer. Really depends on what you're trying to do. Yeah, you'll get these different shapes from your nozzles. Nozzle materials really matter depending on what pesticide product and adjuvants that you're using. So brass used to be very popular back in the days when there was a lot of petroleum carriers and pesticides. Plastic is, like what you get in your backpack sprayer, they'll just kind of give you a plastic one. Both of those are really not good for abrasive materials. So like if you have a wettable powder or a flowable, something like that, it's going to wear them down. By the time you're done spraying, the shape and volume coming out is different than what it's supposed to be. So you're misapplying and you're doing a bad job of applying if you're using those with abrasive products. Stainless steel, it's bold because it's abrasion resistant, but it reacts to water. So there you go. Aluminum, also not abrasive resistant. I don't know, they're out there, but whatever, context, right? Tungsten carbide, this is like kind of a niche thing, very abrasion resistant, very hard, very expensive. And then ceramic. These look like the plastic nozzles, but they have a little white thing inside. Abrasion resistant, they're fantastic for most applications. Yeah. I would say like ceramic is probably going to be your go-to for a lot of things because you can run a lot of things through them. They're super cheap. Yeah. Okay. Cool. To calibrate your equipment, you're going to need two pieces of information. You're going to need your volume that you're applying over time, and then the distance that you're, or area that you're traveling over that period, same period of time. You can see that speed matters, right? You have the same tractor here going at 6 miles an hour, you're getting 10 gallons per acre. Going at 3 miles an hour, you're getting 20 gallons per acre, okay? So speed matters, all else equal, right? So you're just in a different gear, your RPM's the same, your pressure is the same, everything's the same nozzle, same boom, but just speed is changed, you're getting different output. This is what makes tractors great for agriculture. It makes like backpack spraying really difficult because, you know, I have long legs, Max has short legs. We're going at a different speed. I have long arms, he has short arms, right? We're going different area. So each person's gonna have to calibrate that equipment to himself. And, you know, if I drank too much last night, I'm going slow this morning. If Max had too much coffee this morning, it's going fast. So it changes day by day, time, you know, like how tired you are or whatever. Tractor is great because it's consistent. I set it at, you know, 2000 RPM and third gear and just let it go. Whatever, you know? Okay. Yep, so distance over time gives you your area that you're applying. And then your, where's the volume over time? Okay, yeah, your equipment parameters is your volume over time. Then you're gonna first measure this kind of stuff, know what your output is currently from your current setup, then check your product. What is your dilution, your carrier rate, your total volume? And then you're gonna have to either increase or decrease. So like the easiest way to do that is just change the gear on your tractor, go faster or slower. You can also change out nozzles, but that's kind of a pain. But anyways, whatever you do, you're gonna have to do something to adjust it to be at the gallons per acre that you need to end up at with whatever product you're using, okay? Often products will not only say the rate per acre for the product, they'll also give you a minimum or maximum carrier rate. So carrier is water that you mix it in. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah, so you'll have to adjust something for sure, right? If you're moving from one product to another product or getting new equipment or whatever it is, you're gonna have to adjust something, whether it's the nozzles, to have a higher or lower flow rate, your speed, whatever, you're gonna have to change something. Okay. Here's some scenarios. You have a field that's 1 acre, your nozzle output is 25 ounces per minute, your travel speed is 150 feet per minute, and swath width is 5 feet. Okay. Oh yeah, and then your label rate is 1 ounce of pesticide per gallon of water. So this is a volume per volume rate. It's not a per acre rate. It's a thing. You're gonna do this messy equation over here, but basically the core concept here is what is your volume over time and what is your area over time? And then you're able to figure out what you're doing. With, oh, sorry, I thought you raised your hand next. Okay, so we're gonna do 5 feet by 150 feet, so 5 feet width of your swath, your boom. You're going 150 feet per minute, and the denominator here is 1 minute, so we're just gonna use 1 minute to cancel out, right? So 5 times 150 is 750 feet, square feet. How much is this per an acre? 43560 square feet is an acre divided by 750, so you're gonna do 58.08 times to get to 1 acre for that. That's how many minutes it's gonna take you to do 1 acre at the speed. That's cool. At least you know that, right? Very helpful for scheduling your work too. You know how long it's gonna take you to spray an acre. Output per acre is gonna be the 58.08 times 25 ounces. It's gonna give you 1,452 ounces per acre. And then if we need that per gallon, because we're doing like calculating our tank is usually by gallons, we're gonna end up with 128 is how many ounces per gallon, and then you're gonna get 11.34 gallons. And then how much pesticide you're gonna need, because this is a volume per volume. What is that? Volume per volume, not per acre rate, right? So you're gonna get 11.34 ounces from that. Okay, because 1 ounce per gallon, right? Okay. Are we all clear on how that works for volume per volume rate? The easiest thing that you can do is make your denominator 1 minute. Then you cancel them out. if you have, like, you're doing your nozzle output for 2 minutes and then you're running your tractor for calculating your area for 1 minute, you have more math to do and it gets even more confusing. So we do have a worksheet that we co-developed. Thank you, Max. We can distribute that freely to you if you want to work through equipment calibrations on your own, step-by-step guide, what I need to do, ABC. Actually, I think, no, you contributed to that too. Yeah, it's on this, the calibration sheet. Oh, it's all Mac, oh.
I don't remember.
Okay, well, anyways. If you guys want that, email us, we can send it to you. We can both also come out to wherever you are and help you with it if you want, yeah? Okay, we can work with you, your equipment, to make sure it's right. Cool, site sizes. There are all different types of site sizes, and basically, you know, you can find a formula for a rectangle or a circle online. Easily, right? Length times width, or like the pi r squared thing, which I'm terrible with. See, I already lost it. I would have to Google that. Irregularly shaped sites, you can do this by adding these shapes together. You know, you can like, oh, this one kind of has like a circle on the outside, this one kind of has a triangle, and I'll put a rectangle in the middle. And then add them together. This deal over here on the right side is an illustration to show you what a broadcast application would look like on the left, where the whole field is covered. And then a banded application would look like on the right, where only the crop or only the furrow is covered. You would do your rate calculations. The area that you're treating is going to be different, right? So your math is a little bit different there. If you're interested in doing banded applications to save money or whatever you're doing, we can help you with math too, but you know, this is on the study guide materials on the UH website, so if you guys want to read through it, you can. Cool. All right, this is a very important thing for the test, is a nozzle selection chart. If I was you, I'd do this when your bean is fresh. Okay, I actually haven't worked through this one, Max, so.
Oh, you want me to do it?
Yeah, I think better because I didn't actually read it before this.
That's fine. I can take it.
Cool.
Because we go into the math stuff right after this. Okay, thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah.
So quick note, we are technically over time. It's after 11 o'clock. I spent too long this morning talking about plants and soil because I love plants and soil. We do still need another half hour at least to finish up this workshop. If you need to leave because you have a life and things to do, obviously we can't stop you. Please go ahead and do those things. For those of you who stay, I'm going to be increasing the number of CEUs that we offer for this workshop. So we're probably going to be going at least a half hour over. So that means you guys are going to earn 2.5 CEUs. So my apologies, because our time management was not as good as it should have been. You will be compensated for the extra time that you spend with us today. So thank you very much. Let's go ahead and get into it. So nozzle selection. This is going to be a relevant skill for those of you who do use boom sprayers, and for anyone who is attempting to get their private 1A or sorry, their private 1 or commercial 1A certification. This is something that's on our exam. So your boom sprayer might have your nozzles spaced at a certain number of inches. You also buy, your nozzles for your boom, guys. Buy your nozzles for your boom, and they give you a big chart of different nozzles, different PSIs, different travel speeds, different things that they have already calibrated for you to use. So how do we use these tables to our advantage when we're, trying to figure out what nozzle to put on our boom to apply the correct amount of pesticide? So the first thing we need to consider is how far apart our nozzles are. So this table is based on nozzles that are 20 inches apart. So if our nozzles are further apart than that, then we need to convert to the equivalent. So in our scenario, our intended application rate is 10 gallons per acre. Our boom is set up with our nozzle spaced 22 inches apart. So of the nozzles over here on the left side of the screen, which one do we select? What speed do we need to travel? And what PSI do we need to use? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the nozzle spacing conversion factor. So our nozzles are spaced 22 inches apart. The conversion factor for 22 inches is 0.91. We're not going to be multiplying this number. We're going to be dividing by this number. So in this case, 10 gallons per acre with the conversion factor becomes 10.99 gallons per acre. So this is not the amount that we're actually applying. This is the equivalent for this chart over here. Not the easiest concept to understand, but an important one if you're going to pass any exam. Next step is we need to look at this 10.99 gallons per acre number, and we need to find the equivalent over here on this sheet, this chart. So 10.9, we can find it a couple spaces here on this chart. It's here for 504, and it's up here for 502. So what speed do we need to travel? What PSI do we need to use? Well, if I'm able to go 10 miles per hour, then I can use the 504 nozzle with 50 mesh at a PSI of 60. However, if 10 miles per hour is too fast for me and I want to go 5 instead, I have another option. I can use the 502 with 100 mesh. And again, my pressure needs to be 60 PSI. So this is the process for using these charts. First, you need to use the conversion factor. You need to get your equivalent gallons per acre. You need to find that on the sheet, and then you need to select the correct nozzle and the correct PSI. In the field, you will still be applying 10 gallons per acre. This 10.99 that we calculate here, this is just for the equivalency for the sheet. All right, so let's talk about how we actually calculate the correct amount of pesticide to put in an amount of water or other carrier. Yeah.
So if you go back for the other one, so you had a 10.99, how is that, like, would be an option to use the other one that had 10.5 or 11.1, like, how is the rate?
Great, so the question was, we're using 10.99, so why did I select 10.9 here? I'm trying to get as close to 10.99 without going over. If I go over this number, then I am over applying my pesticide, and then that is illegal. If I am too far under this number, then I'm not hitting my target, which is 10 gallons per acre. We could absolutely go for 10. We could go for 9.7. We could go for any of these that are not above 10.99 or 11 in this case. But yeah, good question. Okay, so dilutions, the math that we use for this, it's basically a ratio. We set one side equal to another side, and then we solve for what we don't know. So 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8. If we don't know one of these numbers, how do we solve this equation? So 1/2 is equivalent to unknown over 8. We're going to cross multiply. 2 times n equals 1 times 8. 2n is equal to 8. So then we're going to divide by 2 to isolate n. And we get our answer here as 4. So what does this look like in the real world? So here's our scenario. Our label rate is 2 ounces for every 10 gallons. We need 7 gallons of water to evenly spray our field. So if 2 ounces of pesticide go into 10 gallons of water, how many ounces of pesticide go into 7 gallons of water? So let's set up our equation. Here's what we know, 2 and 10. This is what the label says. So this is what we know. This is what goes on the left. The label goes on the left. What we don't know is how many ounces we need to put into the 7 gallons of water that we're going to apply to our field. 10 gallons of water on the bottom here, 7 gallons of water on the bottom here. You got to keep the units the same. So we cross multiply. 10x equals 2 times 7. 2 times 7 is 14. We divide by 10. X equals 1.4. There's an easier way to do this. 7 divided by 10, 0.7. The label says 10 gallons. We're going to apply 7. 0.7 times 2, 1.4. The label says 2 ounces. We're going to apply an equivalency of 0.7 of those 2 ounces. So that's 1.4. So 2 different ways to get yourself to the same answer. Use whichever one makes the most sense for you. This is what I do in my head. This is what I do on a piece of paper to double check my math and make sure that I did it correctly. So sometimes our labels gives us a rate in ounces per acre. So let's practice that. The label rate is 2 ounces per acre. Our field is 10,396 square feet. So if 2 ounces of pesticide cover 1 acre, how many ounces of pesticide are we going to use to cover our field? 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. Let's set up our equation. Let's cross multiply. Let's solve for x. 0.477 ounces of pesticide to cover our 10,396 square foot field. Of course, there's an easier way to do this. Divide the size of our field by the number of square feet in an acre. This is the number of acres that we're going to be applying to, 0.2386. Multiply this by the number of ounces that we're going to apply, 0.477. Easy, simple as. Measuring out 0.477 ounces of pesticide. That's pretty hard to do. What I'm going to do here is I'm probably going to convert this to milliliters. And then hopefully that gives me a number that's a lot easier to apply. Otherwise, what I could do is I could round down to 0.45 or 0.4. It's a little bit easier to measure in my measuring cup. What I cannot do, I cannot round this up to 0.5 because the label rate is 2 ounces per acre. If I round up, I'm now over the label rate. That's against the law. Sometimes labels list as a percentage dilution rather than ounces per gallon or ounces per acre. So how do we make a 2% dilution of our pesticide? Well, we know that we can cover our field with 10.5 gallons of water. So it's the total amount of solution that we need to make. But we need 2% of that solution to be a pesticide. So how many ounces of pesticide do we add to get that concentration? So first, there are 128 ounces in a gallon. So what is 2% of 128? Multiply that by 0.2, we get 2.56. Now this is a number that I'm going to round down to 2.5 because I can very easily measure out 2.5 ounces. It's a lot harder for me to measure out 2.56 ounces. You also might key in on the fact that this is a consistent number here. So 1 gallon is always going to be 128 ounces. 1% of that is always going to be 1.28. 2% of that is always going to be 2.56. So as you start working with these types of dilutions more and more, you're eventually just going to know, oh, 1%, I'm going to measure out 1.25 ounces for every gallon that I'm going to apply. 2%, I'm going to measure out 2.5 ounces for every gallon that I'm going to apply. It becomes very, very simple and very, very easy to do these types of percentage dilutions. So let's round down. 2.5 in 1 gallon is the equivalent of how many ounces in 10.5 gallons? Well, this is a super easy equation to solve. You just need to cross multiply. 2.5 times 10.5. X times 1 is just X. So there's our answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some water into my tank. I'm then going to add 26.25 ounces of pesticide to that tank. And then I'm going to fill that tank up to the 10.5 gallon mark. I'm not going to add 26.25 ounces of pesticide to 10.5 gallons of water because now my total volume is more than 10.5 gallons. So I'm actually a little bit under 2%. Total volume, 10.5 gallons with 26.25 ounces of pesticide inside that solution. And that's how we do our method. Any questions about that before we get into the practice scenario?
Time for it.
We have like 15 minutes.
Good.
I think we kind of need to.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, we're going to pass around some labels, and then Mark, I'll pass around the labels. You go ahead and begin the exercise.
Cool. All right. So to give us a little bit of applied practice here, and it's not just Max, Kari, and I talking at you. We're going to look at an actual pesticide label. We're going to feed you a bit of information for a scenario context in a farm. And we are going to work through the exercise together on how we're going to come up with our rates and stuff. Okay, so we are pretending that we have a coffee farm, okay? And we are pretending that we have a mealybug infestation on our coffee farm, and we want to get rid of these mealybugs. Okay, so a coffee grower, you in this case, notice a heavy infestation. of insects in their trees, causing leaf curling and berry damage. They need to apply pesticide, but want to do it safely and effectively. Okay, so we identified our pest. That's a very critical point that we spent like an hour talking about today. Is like pest ID and like stuff like that, life cycles and deals, right? We know it's a mealybug because we're very good at this. So we're skipping that step. Kind of fed that information to you. Now, can we all look at our label here and see if it is legal for us to apply this to our crop coffee? And if anybody finds it, just call it out. Let us know the page number. By the way, this is much easier, like if you have a PDF, if you go on the Department of Ag's website, get a PDF, Control F and look, like type in coffee, but on your jug that your pesticide label is gonna be on, you might have to actually be like this. Oh, fantastic.
Let's see.
There.
Excellent.
Page 6.
Yeah, page 6. Okay, so page 6, near the bottom, it has our crops. And just in case you're interested, this is group 24B in the IR4 kind of worlds for specialty crops. We do have a program at UH that gets pesticides labeled for specialty crops, and they're quite active. So if you have a crop here that, you know, like Syngenta or Bayer, they're not going to pay $1 billion to get a crop registered for your whatever niche tropical crop. You can ask the IR4 program to help you. And they work on crop groups. So in this case, 24B is our crop group. And in there, it specifically says coffee. So thank you very much for that. It is legal to apply this pesticide to coffee, right? We see it in the label, page 6, yes? Fantastic. Okay. All right. Is it going to work on mealybugs? How do you know that?
Says
It does say it. Where does it say it?
under pest control, under the coffee box.
Right under where it says coffee, it says pest controlled, and then mealybugs is the third one there. Great. Is there any pre-harvest interval for coffee? So we gotta harvest this and sell our coffee beans and stuff. Is there a pre-harvest interval? Already forgotten where that is.
I think it's something like that. Yeah, I think you're close to it.
REI is 12 hours, but PHI. Page 4.
Yes, page 4. Hey, you have a very good eye. I can tell you read a lot of labels. Page 4 in the middle, MPO has a 0-day pre-harvest interval for all crops on this label. Fantastic, right? We don't need to wait to harvest. But how long are we gonna have to wait before we go into that field to harvest? For our early entry, if we're doing that?
Are you asking what the REI is, or how long the early, you have to wait until early entry?
Early entry, but REI does matter here too. So if we're gonna do early entry to harvest, how long do we have to wait? Do we remember from our topic today? It's not on the label. This one is what we talked about earlier. 4 hours, yeah. So after our spray has finished, if we're gonna go and harvest today with a zero day PHI, then we'll have to wait for 4 hours. But since we're talking about entry into the field, how long is the REI, which is on this label? 12 hours. Fantastic. And where is that? Page 2 in the agricultural use requirements. Also notice there is different PPE here for early entry work, okay? Cool. Okay, we talked about PPE a little bit. But where's the main PPE section here, just so we know what people have to wear? I just noticed something. Front page, fantastic, okay. So, handlers who may be exposed, right? So people like applying it, long sleeve shirt and long pants, shoes plus socks, those people that are like mixing the concentrate, we have all these other PPEs that you need. Yeah? Okay. All right. Now, since we're gonna spray our coffee, we made sure we bought all our PPE that we're gonna need. We're good. What is our rate for coffee?
You said it?
1%.
1 to 2%. What?
Yeah.
Volume per volume, right?
Volume.
So this is not a like 1 ounce per acre situation. This is a volume of product in a volume of carrier, water in this case, okay? You will see this sometimes. So this is a volume per volume rate. Okay. Now to figure out exactly how much we're gonna mix, they have given us this handy table on page 3. And what rate do you think we're gonna spray here if we're having a heavy investigation? 2, right? Okay, I heard that, very good. Notice that the chart and the little indicator on the page before that have a maximum rate of 4. This does not apply to your crop coffee. Your crop caps at 2, right? Very important to read the label in its entirety and understand it very clearly before you start spraying stuff, yeah? Cool. All right. Okay, we're kind of done with our little mini exercise here of staring at labels, unless you guys have questions.
Oh, Mark, I have a question.
Yo, what's up?
For early entry,
Yeah,
what PPE do I need to wear for that? Is it the same as what the applicator was wearing?
no, it is not the same. Someone showed earlier, I think, or maybe I talked
Oh,
about
I
it.
might have not been paying attention or was out of the room for that part.
No, it's cool. It's in the agricultural use box. It does say early entry work. You'll need that. Those extra pieces there. Okay. Okay, I think that it's worth noting that a lot of products, this one included, we can see on timing of application on page 3. There is restrictions for how often you can use this. Okay, so a lot of products have this where they'll kind of force you to rotate through different products or active ingredients or whatever it is. So note that kind of stuff. Also note environmental restrictions, environmental hazards, they'll have more restrictions in there, oftentimes about water, sometimes about bees. Note all of the restrictions before you start applying. I think we run through one label often in our workshops. Impact is on like page 30. It says you cannot spray with or apply within a certain distance of.
Oh, it's 30 feet. It's 30 feet.
30 feet, yeah.
30 feet of a native plant community.
And it's hidden on page like something. It's
It's
not.
one little line.
Yeah,
It's just there.
yeah, it's correct. So make sure you read the labels in their entirety because they have a lot of restrictions and information in there that's not easily going to pop out to your eyes if you don't actually read the whole thing. Oftentimes, we want to just look for our crop and rate.
So like, most labels, it says like how much you can apply per acre, right?
Yeah,
So that's a flat surface. But if you're applying vertical like this, are you still, we technically still use the flat surface, but
Yeah.
wouldn't the amount of AI that we're applying now be less and actually not killing the bug because we're applying vertically instead of flat?
you can select a product like this that has a volume for volume and not an acre rate.
Oh,
So those cases are quite difficult, right? If you're doing a tree crop and the trees like you have.
yeah, you're going
Structurally,
up,
all
right?
trees,
Because if
right?
you're growing on a net and then you're going up like this, then if you're still. So it's, I know some is calculated based on like AI, and some is just like ounces per
Acre.
gallon, right? Or
Oh, yeah,
by
yeah.
acre, yeah, then it's like flat, it's a flat surface.
Yep.
So the the ounces per acre or amount per area rates in labels have to do with the area that you're applying to because of the pesticide getting into the soil.
Okay, so it's
So-
based on the AI beings contaminating. The
So it
actual-
is, they're just talking about the area itself. It has nothing to do with the size of your plants inside. And so when we're talking about legality from the label perspective, all that matters from an inspector's point of view is how much pesticide did you apply to this area of land? Not, did you get all of your plants from top to bottom, tip to root? Those labels do not have a maximum restriction on, usually they don't have a maximum restriction on the amount of water that you use to spray that area. So what matters is the amount of pesticide that gets in that area. If you need to use 20 gallons to fully cover all of your plants, you still only have that maximum amount of pesticide to apply. Sometimes there is a minimum amount of carrier, like you have to do at least 10 gallons per acre to get a good spread, but you can go above that. So if you have really big plants and you have to apply top to bottom, consider using more volume, but you're still only going to have that amount of pesticide. So technically you're applying a much more diluted version of the product across your entire field. It's just, the actual surface area for application is greater because you have a lot of plants, whereas the application area, the ground perspective, is still the same. So like Mark said, if that is your concern, since you are doing vertical farming, find something like this that is in a percentage dilution, not necessarily in amount per acre. The amount per acre stuff is, it's really common for a lot of agricultural products, but you also see it for a lot of herbicides. And so that's where that makes a lot more sense because you're spraying this herbicide all along the ground. So this much pesticide per acre of area, we don't want any more than that in the soil because then that's going to cause problems. Typically there are also maximum annual use rates. So I can apply my pesticide 2 ounces per acre, but my maximum use is, 7 ounces per year. So that means I only get to apply 3 times. Or I can do a 4th application at half the rate if I think it's going to be effective. But there's a lot of stuff to be mindful of when you're using a pesticide. Selecting the pesticide based on the rate it gives you is also a really good tool or way to select pesticides. If I'm looking at a pesticide and the rate that it's giving me is something that I don't understand, or it's in really high numbers that don't work for my application, then I'm going to find a different pesticide that gives me directions that I can make sense of and that I feel like I can actually follow with the experience that I have, the knowledge that I have, and the equipment that I have, and also the time that I have to do it. So, we have to talk about really abstract, general concepts and situations in these workshops. For real world specific questions for your farm or your workplace or whatever, just call us and set up a consultation. We're more than happy to come out and look at stuff in person and give you guys some actual real advice with the actual pesticides you're going to be using. So don't hesitate to call. I don't charge for my consultative services. So please utilize me as much as you guys need. Yeah.
It's a simple question. So if the mode of action, you said it's not in this one specifically, right? When usually it is, where will you find it?
Usually it would be right here on top.
Right.
Yeah. So
Oh, sorry. So for the recording, it's usually right on top of the front page under the trade name
yeah. Otherwise, just go to Google.
Oh, yeah.
or on top of the trade. I don't know.
I was actually kind of looking at that.
Yeah, labels are laid out differently based on who registered the label. So every manufacturer has a different format for their labels. Most of the information
Yeah.
is gonna be consistent across labels from different manufacturers, stuff like the PPE, the application amounts, different types of precautionary warnings.
A little.
But- Their labels are different. And so you need to be able to adapt to different formats and different organizations of information. So this is why we always say, read the entire list. There's not just one section where it's going to list, these are all the restrictions that you need to follow when you are using this product. There might be a section with general restrictions, but there are going to be more hidden throughout the label. So like really, really read them carefully. And that's another service that we can offer for you. If you're reading a label and you're confused by what you're seeing, give me a call, give Kari a call. Don't call Mark because he's never in his office. Call me or Kari.
You can email me.
You can email Mark. We'll sit down, we'll read through the label, we'll help you interpret it, we'll find the restrictions that are relevant for you. We'll give you the best possible advice you can to move forward. So again, utilize your resources. We are a resource for you. We are here to help you. Neither Kari nor I are inspectors. We are educators. If we see something on your farm or you tell us that you did something illegal, you don't get in trouble. You will never get in trouble. If I go tell an inspector that, hey, I saw something on this guy's farm and you should go check it out and inspect him, guess what? I get fired. Because that's not how we do things. We are a safe space. You'll never get in trouble when you talk to either Kari or I or any of the other education specialists within the department. We have one on every single island. So even if you're not here on Oahu, for those of you who are watching the video, we have support staff available for you. I think I might be done ranting for the day.
I'm not done. Please, if you want your CEUs, or even if you don't need them, please fill out the course assessment. This is very, very important for us. It's on the screen for recording, and then also Max passed out these QR code on paper. Please do it. Please give us feedback for leaving.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Mark, Kari, and I will, stick around for a while if you guys want to talk story and ask more questions. But please fill out the course assessment and do not forget to sign out at the end to earn your CEUs. Thank you all very much for coming. We really, really appreciate you joining us today.